Hello, my name is Miss Amber, and I'm here with your English 11A reading selection review featuring my lovely cup of tea here. So, basically, this series, if you've been watching, or if this is your first video, this is a series where we go over some of the reading selections from the tutorials to make sure that you guys understand not just the reading itself, but also any questions or analysis around it so that you can have a better chance at scoring well on the mastery test. We know that you're going through these classes alone, and some of these are very difficult to understand on the surface. And if you don't remember some things from previous English classes, or if you've never encountered some of these things before, it's a little hard to, do that self-teaching when you're learning everything for the first time. Now, this lesson is from Unit 1, Lesson 4, which is Poetry in the Age of Reason. That's what we've been going over for the last couple videos. And so this one is going to be on one of the poems that's in the lesson, which is Prospect of the Future Glory of America by John Trumbull. So I am going to actually share my screen. And actually, before I do that, I want to make sure that everyone knows if you're watching this video, you should definitely be going through the lesson or having completed it already and then going back over it a second time. Let me move myself up to this corner. The thing is, if you're just now doing the tutorial for the first time, you cannot skip ahead or skip around in the lesson. I'm going to be naming slides that we're on and that we're working on. And if you've gone through the lesson once and you open it up again, they'll let you go around to whatever slide you want. But you definitely need to have gone through it once, or else you'll be stuck at the last slide that you left off on, and you won't be able to complete any of the work or look at what I'm referencing. So now that we have that disclaimer out of the way, we are actually going to skip over to slide 16. It should be slide 16. Let's see. Yes. So slide 16 is a lesson activity. They give you a new piece of reading in here, a new poem. This is where we find The Prospect of the Future Glory of America by John Trumbull. And we're going to answer some of these questions here. Now, I'm going to read the lesson activity text up here, and then we'll look at some of the questions, and then we'll dive into reading, and we'll look at some of the tools that you might need to figure out the explanation here. So here it says, you will determine the meaning of words and phrases as they are used in the text, including figurative and connotative meanings. So figurative means anything that isn't literal. We kind of went over this in the last lesson, but basically literal is when you are describing exactly what's happening as it is happening. Figurative is when you exaggerate, when you use figures of speech. See, figurative and figures of speech have that word in common. If you're using like flowery or creative comparisons, think of like, for example, idioms, which are phrases that don't translate directly in other languages. When you say it's raining cats and dogs, right? That's not a thing that is literally happening. Dogs and cats are not falling out of the sky. That is just a phrase that we use when it's raining very heavily. So figurative language is anything, any creative way of describing things that's not literal. And connotative has to do with the feeling that words have, right? So we have different words that we use based on if we're expressing something positive or negative, or if we're just expressing something neutral. So connotative is taking that association, positive, negative, or neutral, and using words on purpose because they have those meanings. So connotative has to do with connections. That's how I remember that. There's denotative, that's dictionary. They start with the same letter. And connotative, which is connections. You want the emotional connections to the word. So you're including figurative, that's creative, and connotative, that's the emotional connection to the meanings of the words, right? That's what they mean here. You're going to analyze the impact of word choices on meaning and tone. So this is basically connected to what we were just talking about. Analyze means to look closely at. So you're going to look closely at why people would choose words that have these feelings attached to them, how that helps build up what they're saying. And tone has to do with what the author feels and is trying to express in the text. So this includes words with multiple meanings or language that is particularly fresh, engaging, or beautiful, and cite strong and thorough text evidence to support analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences. Inferences are educated guesses drawn from the text. You're going to analyze a case in which grasping point of view is first, second, or third. If we're talking I, me, and my, you and yours, or he, she, and they. So it's like the position that you're viewing the story. Just as a quick overview, you want to think of point of view as like what you're seeing in a movie or a game, right? For those of you who play games, you might be familiar with FPS. That's a first person shooter. That is when you are looking through the eyes of the character, right? So you were supposed to be the person who's on screen. And this happens sometimes in movies too. If they creatively want you to experience what the character is experiencing, they will make it so that no one, like the person who's viewing things on screen, isn't visible. It's just you seeing what the camera has to show, and it makes you feel like you're the person experiencing it. That's first person. Second person is when the story is talking to you. So if you've ever had a game or a movie where like they break the fourth wall, they look at the camera and they're talking to you, the person who's watching the movie or the person who is playing the game, and they use the words you and your when they're talking to you. That's second person point of view. And third person point of view is what we're used to seeing. It's when we're on the outside watching things unfold. So think of like if you're watching a play. And most games too are in third person. You're like this sort of godly character looking down on the stuff that's happening and helping to make decisions. In terms of movies, a lot of movies are just showing you a story. So like you're the person in the audience watching, but what you're doing doesn't affect anything. You're just viewing. Books can also have these different points of view. It's just that they have to use these words to show which points of view it is. If you are supposed to be in the shoes of the person telling the story, they're gonna use I, me, and mine. If you are watching from a distance and the story is just something you're consuming or experiencing, they'll use he, she, and they, talking about all the other characters in the book. No one will have an I, me, or my moment. And there are some books called Choose Your Own Adventure where you're supposed to put yourself in the shoes of the person who's in the story, and the book is talking to you. So you'll have options like, you hear footsteps across the hall. Do you want to go check it out? That's second person. So that's just a little rundown on that. So they want you to understand that and analyze a case, it says. That means basically an example, where grasping information about these points of view requires distinguishing or being able to tell what is directly stated in a text from what is really meant. So satire, sarcasm, irony, or understatement. So this was a lot of words. We went through a lot of explanation. This last section here basically says they want you to be able to tell the difference between the dictionary definition of what is said that's directly stated and what the person really means. And that's why they have sarcasm and satire listed there. Sometimes when you make a joke, you don't literally mean the joke. You know that maybe it would sound weird or funny if someone took the literal definition of it, but you're making an emotional point. So you have to be able to tell the difference between the words and how they look on paper and the meaning based on the language. So think of like when it's raining and someone asks you if you like the weather. If you roll your eyes and say, ugh, yeah, it's great, you literally said it's great. If someone wrote that down on paper or in a text message, it would look like you're actually saying good things about the weather, right? But if you're in person and you hear it, the tone might kind of hint to you that the meaning is sarcastic. You mean the opposite of what you're saying, right? So there's a difference between what you actually said and what you mean. Now, this happens in writing too, but it's a little harder to figure it out in writing because you can't hear what's going on with the person who wrote the text. So there are other clues that you have to look for to tell if something is sarcasm or satire, like if they're making a joke, right? So they want you to try to figure out from the text what's actually meant straightforward and what has other meaning underneath it. And that's kind of where the figurative and connotative meanings of words come through. Because if you know which words have positive or negative associations, it's easier for you to tell if something is a joke or if it's sarcastic or not, especially in writing where you can't hear what's being said. Now, if we scroll down and look at these questions, we're going to just read through the questions and figure out what we have to know. And then we're going to read the poem and come back to these questions. So this first section says, what is the meter of this poem? Now, just to show you, this is related to previous slides, right? So we had a couple slides. I think that this is from 14. Let's see. We've got, oh, this might be some of the concepts that are here. Yes, this is from slide 10, where they talk about an iamb. We discussed this in the last video. And then there's iambic pentameter. So an iamb is when you have a unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. And this is from previous English lessons. Iambic pentameter is when you have that pattern, unstressed and stressed syllables repeating 5 times. I do want to acknowledge that this phrasing is a little weird here. It says unaccented and then accented. This is exactly the same as unstressed and then stressed. We're talking about the length of the sound. If you have a long syllable that stretches out, it is stressed. If you have a short syllable, it is not stressed. It is unstressed. They used unaccented and accented here. I'm not really sure why it's different here. It is unstressed and stressed in every other lesson in the English classes. So I just want to point that out in case anyone was confused or thought these were talking about 2 different things. Now, I do want to give you an example of meter, and I'll do that when we're trying to answer the question. I'll give you an example. But for now, we're gonna head back to 16. So that is a concept they want you to know before you start this lesson, and they don't go over it a whole lot, but I'll show you a couple things, give you an explanation, and let you know where you can go to get this explanation. Now, of course, you can Google meter and see if the explanation like helps you, but we also have our own resources here at NVA and Step Up, and you can ask your advocate or your teacher or mentor for that if you need it. And I'll give you more information about that and what it looks like when we get to this question. So the second question here, what contrasting imagery does Trumbull use to describe his vision for the future of the nation? So contrasting means different. If you're comparing and contrasting, comparing is when you find things that are similar about 2 or more things. Contrasting is when you're looking for what's different about 2 or more things. So what different imagery does Trumbull use to describe his vision for the future of the nation? That's basically what this question is asking. So we know we're looking for the different ways that he uses to describe that. And then part C, we have, where does Trumbull use personification? Personification is one of the other things that's covered on slides 10 and 11. I'll pop right back there just to make sure. Personification is figurative, so that's not literal, creative, language that describes something non-human by giving it human traits or abilities. Now, just to give you a live example of that, if you were to look at trees that are kind of like wiggling in the wind, say there's a really hard gust of wind. This is the example I always use. If you say those trees are dancing in the wind, some books might use that to try to, describe it in a fancier way. Trees cannot dance, but humans can. So you're giving a human trait to something that is not human to describe it and make it sound more exciting. So that's what personification is. So they're asking, where does he use this, and for what purpose does he use this technique? So purpose has to do with why a person does it. What is the point of it, right? So they're asking you, where does that happen, and what do you think he's doing it for? And these last couple questions, we have part D. What characterizes, that means what traits are in the poem. So what characterizes this poem as a work from the age of reason? So we got some explanations earlier about what the age of reason was. And you should be able to go back to the beginning of this lesson to dig that up. There are certain traits that the poems from the age of reason have. I will go to the slide just so that you can see it. So they give you some information here specifically about what this writing was made up of. So this is pretty much you're going to compare the poem to this information right here, and this is pretty much where you can find the answer to that question, honestly. Let's see, we'll go right back up to 16. And then scrolling down to the very last question, what does the phrase Queen of Empires and Nurse of Arms signify? So you're going to want to, obviously they're giving you a quote, so this comes from the poem, right? So they're gonna ask you for your opinion on what this signifies. Signifies means to represent something. So what does Queen of Empires and Nurse of Arms represent in this poem? So now that we have that out of the way, I'm going to read through this poem and at least give you the I guess like modern translation of it. I'll go over some of the vocabulary, we'll look it up together, and then we'll visit meter, right? I might go through maybe one example of imagery. We know what personification is, right? It's when you give something that's not human traits. So now that you know what this is, you should be able to answer that question. The purpose of these videos, these reading selection reviews, is to make sure that you understand what the reading selections are saying. So we're not going to be going through each of the questions and answering them. I mostly want to just give you the tools that you need to be able to try to answer the questions yourself, especially because once you submit your answer, they give you notes here in Admentum about what they were expecting. So you can actually look at the difference between your answer and the notes that they give you for these questions and figure out where the difference is. What was it that you didn't understand? The problem is that doing that and having the notes on some of the things they were looking for in the answers does not actually help you understand the poem. So that's what the reading selection review is about. Poetry is one of the hardest sections of lessons for anyone to go through in all grades for English. We have a lot of students that have issues with it no matter what. So I'm willing to go over the meter of the poem because I know that that's a difficult part. And I also want to share the resources that we have. But the rest of it, especially because I showed you a couple of the slides that you could find some of the things on, you'll have to be trying to complete that on your own. If you are having issues understanding the lesson and what it wants from you, even after you complete it and you can see and compare your notes, please feel free. Please feel free to schedule a tutoring session. That is what I and the other tutors are here for. Okay, so now we're going to get into this poem and we're going to read it. So this says, to views far distant and scenes more bright, along the veil of time extend thy sight, where hours and days and years from yon dim pole, wave following wave in long succession roll. There see and pomp for ages without end, the glories of the Western world ascend. See, this blessed land in Orient morn appears, waked from the slumber of 6,000 years, while clouds of darkness veiled each cheering ray to savage beasts and savage men a prey. Fair freedom now, her ensigns, bright displays, and peace and plenty bless the golden days. In radiant state the imperial realm shall rise, her splendor circling to the boundless skies. Of every fair she boasts the assembled charms, the queen of empires and the nurse of arms. So we're going to take this a couple lines at a time. To views far distant. So a view is something that you can see, right? So we're talking about kind of like painting a picture. So to views far distant and to scenes more bright. So usually when you say to something, it means either one of two things. You're dedicating something to something. You're dedicating like an achievement to something. Or you're just saying to, like towards, right? To views far distant and scenes more bright, along the veil of time extend thy sight. So a veil is basically like a time of, because there are two different types of veils, right? So there's VEIL, which is when something is shrouded, and then there is VALE. So VALE is basically, we're talking about I guess, like, for lack of better words, a vale is like a valley, right? That's the word we're looking for, a valley. So a valley is basically a low space between like two high hills or two cliffs. So that's what like a valley is. So the veil of time, along the veil of time, extend thy sight. What they're saying here is pretty much that the veil of time is a valley of time. So this is kind of like figurative language. They're asking someone to extend their sight along like a timeline. So to look ahead into a future. This is just a very creative way of saying extend your sight into the future. To views that are far distant, because the future is ahead of us, and scenes that are bright, especially because we know the topic of the poem is the prospect of the future glory of America, right? So that tells us right there that this author, John Trumbull, actually thinks that America is going to be prosperous in the future and be great. So we're talking about, in a very like creative, long-winded way, looking ahead to the future for good things. Bright things usually means good things. So it says, we're hours and days and years from yon dim pole. So yon just means like here, basically. Like if you're looking yonder, it's just like an old word for like that. So yon is like that. So you could literally read it to yourself as we're hours and days and years from that dim pole. So dim is when the light is low, and pole is literally just like literally a pole. So they're saying that it's like a pole is basically like a tall piece of wood, right, that you can grab onto. So they're marking the current time as a dim pole. It's kind of like a metaphor. They're saying that right now things are not so bright. So we're looking into the future where things are better. So wave following wave in long succession roll. So wave following wave in long succession roll. They're talking about how the hours and days and years are rolling away from the current position. So, like normally when you're exploring, or if you're marking the position of something, usually you'll put a pin in it. In this case, this is a time period. So he's talking about the pole being the marker for the time he's in right now. And the hours and days are rolling in succession. Succession means back to back to back. So one after the other. So this is just a part of explaining that they're looking into the future from the dim area that they're in today. So this next line says, there see. So there is supposed to be not here. So here is the dim pole, right? There in the future is supposed to be where things are brighter. So now he's talking about what the bright future is like. There see in pomp for ages without end. Pomp just means comfort. It's comfort due to luxury. So if you've ever heard the phrase pomp and circumstance, it's basically dealing with being in comfort because you're in a good position. You can afford to be a little fancy. You can afford to relax and enjoy like the finer fruits of life. So he's basically saying that in the future, America is going to be in comfort and luxury for days without end. And you can tell that because of the next line. There see and pomp for ages without end, the glories of the Western world ascend. Ascend means to go up, and glory basically means like high achievement. So this whole first section, these first 6 lines are talking about how things are not the best right now, but we're looking to the future where things are better because John Trumbull thinks that America will be in a better place. See, this blessed land in orient morn appears, waked from the slumber of 6,000 years. So blessed is just another way of saying blessed. Blessed was just est. They added that to make it past tense. So this blessed land in orient morn appears. So if you remember, America was actually discovered because the explorer, not just Christopher Columbus, there were other people as well, but Christopher Columbus specifically was looking for a way to sail to Asia. So he obviously was not the first person to discover America, but in the very beginning, when he first landed here, he thought he might have found Asia. And this was after he had landed a couple other places first. So they're just using Orient to refer to how it was discovered and waked from the slumber of 6,000 years. They're basically, he's basically talking about how they discovered, how they discovered America. And then while clouds of darkness veiled each cheering ray. So they're saying, like, so rays are basically bright lines of sunlight that filter down, like from the sun. So they're saying these rays of brightness, remember brightness means good things, were veiled or covered, hidden by clouds of darkness. So while clouds of darkness veiled each cheering ray, to savage beasts and savage men a prey. So what this is basically saying is that the clouds of darkness, the bad things that are hiding like the glory and achievement that America can get to, pretty much what they're saying here is that these clouds of darkness hid the glory of America from the people who were there at the time. So they're talking about Native people, other people who were trying to conquest America before England started doing it. They're basically trying to categorize everyone who isn't trying to make America as people who couldn't bring America to its potential. And so they're referring to them as savage beasts and savage men. So they're saying that before America was formed by the people who came over from Britain, that the darkness concealed or hid from the people who were there, the savage beasts and savage men, hid the cheering rays. So this is basically an argument that only the people who established America could have helped it be great, is what this is saying. Fair freedom now, her ensigns bright displays. So pretty much, ensigns are just, I'm trying to think of how to explain it without going to the dictionary definition. But you know what? We should actually do that. I think we're gonna go ahead and look it up together. So if we go to ensign definition, and I'm doing this because sometimes It's easy to remember the idea of words, but you always want to make sure that you understand. And also, I want to encourage students to actually look up words if they don't know the exact dictionary definition. I do this as an adult, going through pretty much anything. If you ever see a word that you don't know, you should look it up. And you should be able to do that even if you're dealing with a test or anything like that. Yes. So this is a flag or standard. I wasn't sure if it was definitely considered a flag or not, but I'm glad I checked. So we have a flag or standard, especially a military or naval one, indicating nationality. So we're basically talking hardcore about how Fair Freedom now waves her flag, the flag of America. So Fair Freedom now, her ensign's bright display. So we're saying the flag of America displays brightly over the country, now that it's been settled and turned into America. Now, they mention fair freedom here, and then they use the word her. So this is a very obvious example of personification. They're using her to refer to freedom as a person. And this was pretty common back then. Basically, they would take concepts that they felt were very important and treat them like spirits who are looking down and guiding them, especially in poetry. You'll see providence a lot, especially if you finish the colonial literature lesson that came before this one. So freedom, providence, destiny. Back in the older literature times, they would refer to these often as people so that they could use language like, destiny has given me her blessing to carry out my mission, that kind of thing. So you always want to take note whenever things are capitalized like this and if they use pronouns here, because they're basically referring to this concept, this idea, as a person. So fair freedom now her ensign's bright displays, and peace and plenty bless the golden days. So golden days here, literally the days are not colored gold, but golden is considered to be good, valuable, prosperous. You're making money. Gold is worth money, right? So golden days is a stretch of a period of time where everything is good. So peace and plenty. Plenty means there's lots of food, there's lots of money. Everyone is surviving and living well. So they're saying that the clouds of darkness were covering all of the potential that America had from the people who were here at the time. And now that it's been settled and it's been turned into America, there's peace and plenty for everyone and the days are great. In radiant state, so radiant is just like a fancy word for bright and beautiful. So in radiant state, the imperial realm shall rise. So we're talking, imperial is usually referring to an empire. So they're probably referring to Britain. Her splendor circling to the boundless skies. So we're talking about here, America being its own country governing itself. I think that even though Britain is definitely an empire, because America split off from Britain, they didn't consider themselves an empire because they didn't have a king or anything, but they did have a government that was, over things, or at least they wanted it to be. Of every fair, she boasts the assembled charms, and the queen of empires, the queen of empires, and the nurse of arms. So we've got more her here, right? Her splendor. So we're still talking about fair freedom. That's the only her that we've seen in that line. So we're carrying this idea of fair freedom being a person into the rest of the poem. Now remember, there's a question here about personification. So you want to keep that in mind. So her splendor means the splendor of freedom. Splendor is basically riches, wealth, right? So circling to the boundless skies. Boundless means there's no boundaries, right? And skies, we're just referring to the sky. So we're just saying that literally, there's no limit to the amount of like riches, glory, luxury that America, and even just good things that America can do. Yep. So of every fair, she boasts the assembled charms. So assembled is when you bring things together. Boasting is when you can show something off. So of every fair, she boasts the assembled charms, the queen of empires and the nurse of arms. So we're referring to fair freedom as the queen of empires and the nurse of arms here. Now, this last line is a little tricky, especially because there's a question about this. So knowing what we know, right? Knowing what we know about this poem being about America, being about the fact that America is great because it's free, it's prospering, it's making money, right? We've personified fair freedom as a her. So you want to think about why they would want to refer to fair freedom as one, queen of empires, and two, nurse of arms. So arms would be like weapons. So nurse of arms might be a couple different things. Nurse of arms could potentially mean a nurse, like in a battlefield where people can come to rest, like medical tents, that kind of thing. Nurse of arms could also be someone taking care of weapons. So these are just a couple of ideas. There are other ones, but you'll want to think about why they're calling fair freedom the nurse of arms and the queen of empires. So now that we've gone through this poem, we've gone through what it means. We're talking about America being glorious, about its potential being dark before, and having a bright future, right? So now we're going to drop down to part A, which is a difficult question, especially if you don't remember any of the stuff about poetry. I'm sure that you can read this, you're like, okay, yeah, I got it. I understand the point of this poem. Great. But once they ask you what the meter is, you're like, what? What is that? What are they talking about? So what I'm going to do is open up one of the resources that we have for you guys. So there's a couple places that you can go to look for meter, but most of them are in previous lessons. This lesson doesn't offer a whole lot about showing you what poetry is and how it works. On slide 10, you do get a small idea. They give you the iamb and iambic pentameter. So an iamb is when you have a short or unstressed syllable followed by a long or stressed syllable. And iambic pentameter is when you have a pattern of that repeated 5 times in a line. Now, the first hint I want to give you for some of you students that kind of remember but aren't sure is to tell you the first step is to break down how many syllables are in each line. Now, this poem kind of takes on the same form of syllables throughout all the lines. So I would probably choose 2 lines and break them down. And if they are the same, you can pretty much be rest assured that for this poem, because it has that same rhythm, like when I was reading it, you can tell the lines kind of sound the same. We're hours and days and years from yon dim pole, wave following wave in long succession roll. Their sea and pomp for ages without end, the glories of Western world ascend. You can hear how alike each of the lines sound, right? That's not an accident. It was done on purpose. And it's done by using the pattern of syllables to create a rhythm. I know it's kind of hard to see, but I'll give you a hint before we move into like tips for people who are having like really big issues. So what you want to do is pick one of these lines and count how many syllables there are. If you don't know what a syllable is, that's okay. I got you. A syllable is a unit of sound. It is the number of sounds that a word is made up of. So just starting with what we have here, 2. The word 2 has 1 sound. It is literally just that 1 sound, 2. So that is a 1-syllable word. Views is also a 1-syllable word. It has all these letters, but this I and this E kind of meld together with this W, views. There's no like VUs. That's not how we say it. The syllables depend on how we pronounce the word. That's what's actually important. The syllables depend on how we pronounce the word, not always how it's spelled. So because we say views all together, that is one sound, views, two views, right? So then we have far. Far is also a one syllable word. It is just one sound, far. Now, distant is when we have our first two syllable word here in this line. Distant, right? These are two sounds. You can break them down. Distant. You can feel it on your tongue when you say it. Your tongue has to like prepare for that T, right? We have dis with the S, and then you have to make a completely different sound on your tongue. Distant, because the T is different. So one syllable, one syllable, one syllable, and then we have two. So distant, and is one, two is one, scenes. Scenes. Scenes is also one syllable. We have this C-E-N-E going on here, but they all roll together. Scenes. And then we have more, which is one, and bright. For bright, we have two. Bright. So two views far distant, and two scenes more bright, right? Now, if you're trying to figure out what the pattern is, right? So iambic pentameter is when you have a pattern of an unstressed syllable, that's a short syllable, and a long syllable, that is a stressed syllable, repeating 5 times. So math would tell you that if you have two syllables repeating 5 times, 2 times 5 is 10. So if you've got iambic pentameter, the line will have 10 syllables. Now, they pretty much gave this one away to you with the notes that were there. They didn't mention any other type of syllable patterns, really. There's one for the last poem. They did mention it for the last poem. There's iambic tetrameter. That's when it repeats 4 times. But 4 times 2 would be 8. So all you would have to do to make sure to see which one of these it is count the number of syllables here. What will also help in terms of you figuring out if it's iambic is for you to sound out. So like basically what I would do is I would break these down into groups of 2, right? Because an iamb is 2 syllables. So I would put a line here. So this is one iamb, this is one iamb, or at least if you're going by the lesson, you would assume they're iambs. So this would be one, this would be one, and then we have this one last word, which is 2 syllables. So it can also be an iamb, even though it's one word. Now, what you want to do to make sure it's an iamb and not anything else is sound out the syllables to make sure it's in that pattern of one short, one long. Two is a short syllable. 2. That's it. There's no stretching, right? When we say views, though, views stretches on. All of those vowels here get to work, right? To views. You can literally hear it, to views, right? The word to sounds shorter than the word views because views is a longer or stressed syllable. So to make sure that this is iambic pentameter, what you will want to do is say the rest of these lines to make sure that you actually have stress syllables where they're supposed to be. Views is a stress syllable. So you want the next one, far, to be a short syllable. Far is short. Then we have distant, right? You can hear it. The I in distant stretches longer than that last in. It's not distant, right? It's distant. That int cuts off really shortly. Even though we know that ANT is ant, right? This syllable is cut short because of this ST combo. And that's why I say it's important to listen to how the words actually sound the way that we say them. Now, if you have an accent from different parts of like the country, sometimes it might be difficult for you to count syllables. But if you you know, if you need to Google a word to like hear how most people pronounce a word to make sure you're thinking about it correctly, feel free to do that. Now that we've gone over what this likely is, I do want to show off the actual resources that we have for you guys. So we have a database of lessons. I'm going to go ahead and let's see, where is it? It should be here. Yes. So this is basically a big list of topics that are covered from all of the English classes. Yeah, there we go. It's loaded in. There is a lot of poetry that's covered both in 10B and 9A. So I'm going to go ahead and click 9A. As you can see, there's color coding here at the top, right? So we have purpose of a text, focus on language, literary devices, related to writing essays, comparing and contrasting concepts. So comparing is things that are the same and things that are different. And poetry. Poetry is what we're looking for. So we're looking for lines that are this color, right? I have these set up for every single class, and they are listed by class and number. So like here it says English 9A, and then here at the end we have 1.1. 1.1 means 1 is the unit, point, lesson. So this is the first lesson. Whoops, 1.1. So we have 1 for the lesson, 1 for the unit. And as you go down, so we have like a 1.6 here. 1 is the unit 1, the 6 would be the lesson 6. There are 6 lessons. There are at least 6 lessons in unit 1 if we have this listed here. So we're scrolling. I do want to tell you, I note if there's any other lessons that reference what's here, right? And then we have the title of the lesson here. So we have titles here for you guys. Now, if we scroll down here, we have all of this poetry stuff, right? Now, here's the kicker. This is not an online version of the tutorials for you to like go back and look at any time. We know that the tutorials are long. That's a really difficult thing to do, to try to go through old lessons and read the whole thing to understand stuff. So no, it's not that. We have PowerPoints that isolate each of the sections into its own like mini presentation. If you've looked at any of the math summaries, this is basically a math summary, but for English. So say you're looking for meter, right? You find meter here. So if you click on this, it's going to open up a PowerPoint. The PowerPoint's only going to be a few slides long. So if we look over here on the left, we've got 14 slides. Now these 14 slides are not all things that you need necessarily, but the slides are pretty short, and that's why there's, you know, for this one anyway, for meter, there's more of them than usual. So we're looking for meter, right? Even this here, this is just a title. So some of these slides are actually just titles and they don't have content on them. So we go for meter. Meter is one of the most important ways that poets create rhythm, right? So the most basic meter, a unit of a meter is a foot. So a foot is pretty much the pattern. So an iamb is a type of poetic foot. It's that unstressed syllable and then the stressed syllable. So that unit of 2. So once we move in here, we've got like examples, right? So syllables could be stressed, unstressed, or unstressed, stressed. And there's some other ones listed here, but that's not what we're looking for, right? We want an example of iambic pentameter because we think that that's what the poem is, right? So if we come here, we've got everything listed in order. So first of all, there's this table that tells you what the types are. So if that pattern happens 1 time, here's the name. If it happens 2 times, here's the name. If it happens 3 times, here's the name. So if we go down to 5, we have pentameter. That's what we're looking for, right? So if we go to the next slide, starts off with manometer. So we know that this is 1 from this table, right? Manometer is 1. So what we're looking for is the slide that says pentameter. So if you count down 1, 2, right? 3, 4, 5. That's how we get here. So a pentameter is a line with 5 feet. So it's a pattern of syllables that repeats 5 times. That's what they mean by 5 feet. So then they give you an example of what this looks like. So this example here, it tells you this is iambic. This is iambic pentameter specifically, right? So this is an example of what we're looking for. My mistress's eyes, or I guess like my mistress, like it should be mistresses, but the way that they pronounce it in the olden days is my mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. So this breaks down your pairs and it even bolds the long syllables so that if you want a hint at which ones are long, you can sound it out for yourself and kind of get an idea of what it is. And this the whole thing for these 4 lines. So it's not just this one line you can go off of. If you want to test it with other words, you can come down here and like basically say these out loud to help you understand how to break it down, how to find iambic pentameter. So what you will want to do is basically compare this breakdown to what's happening in this poem. And if you think that they're alike, then you will be able to answer part A of this question. Now, for those of you who are in MVA, if you have any of the English resource courses, this is in there. This is in those resource courses. And actually, you know, I can probably show you how to find it. Let's see, we're in 11A, resources. So if we open up resources, and there's like a couple steps here. So if you're in your resource course, this is similar to how it looks to you. I think that your buttons are a little smaller, but basically here. So you're gonna come here to the English concept explanation and access. So this is basically what it is, English concepts. That's what that form is called. You're gonna open up this document, and this links you directly to the spreadsheet, this green link right here. This is an explanation of what it is, and it tells you how to save it down here. You can actually just put it on your computer so you can open it up whenever you want. It's view only, so you can't edit it, but you should be able to click the links and open things up. So literally, if you click on this, it will open up that exact sheet we were looking at before. Here we go. This is it. This is where we are. So that's how you access it. If you do not have the English resource course, which I know that some people don't, if you are Step Up, you will not have this course. But that doesn't mean that you can't access the course. What you're going to have to do is ask your advocate and say, hey, I want the link to the English concept summaries. And your mentor should be able to give that to you. They should be able to go into the system to be able to find the resource courses. You can also, in Admentum, send a message to me, Miss Amber. My name is Amber Stokely. Once you start typing in the word Amber, you're going to get 2 names. There's one other Amber besides me. You should be able to click on me from the drop down and email me and say, hey, can you link me the English concept summaries? And I will literally just send you the link. And you can save that not just for this class, but for any other English class that you're doing, because those PowerPoints have lessons and pieces of information on them that you'll find in everything that you're going through. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing now. So that's the explanation for that poem. This is Prospect of the Future Glory of America. I hope that this explanation helped you understand the poem a bit better, so that you can have a better chance of answering those questions and getting through the rest of the class too. Because understanding poetry is very difficult. And I want to make sure that everyone has a chance at getting what they need to answer these questions. Alrighty, I think that that's about it for this excerpt. This is Miss Amber signing off. And as always, good luck with the rest of your English class.